I never thought that moving out of my old house would be so painful. Every corner of this place held pieces of my life, echoes of laughter, the scent of Sunday dinners, and the warmth of memories that refused to fade. My son, Daniel, insisted on helping me pack. "You shouldn't do this alone, Mom," he said, forcing a small smile. He didn't know that I wasn't just packing furniture. I was packing decades of love, loss, and things too heavy for any box. As we filled the last few cartons, I felt a strange unease in my chest, like something unspoken lingered between us. He seemed distant, distracted, as if each item he placed in a box carried a secret he wasn't ready to share. I watched him as he moved from room to room, carefully folding my clothes, stacking the books his father once read aloud, and wrapping the porcelain figurines I loved since my youth. His hands trembled a little, or maybe it was my imagination. Every time our eyes met, he'd look away quickly, pretending to be busy. The silence between us felt thick, filled with words neither of us could say. I wanted to tell him that moving wasn't just about leaving a house. It was about saying goodbye to who we used to be. When we reached the final suitcase, Daniel told me to rest while he finished. I sat by the doorway, exhausted, watching him through the faint golden light of the setting sun. That's when I noticed it, the way he lingered over something on the dresser, his eyes glistening. He hesitated, then gently placed a small object into the suitcase. His shoulders slumped, and he closed it quietly, almost reverently. My heart sank. Something about his expression tore at me. That wasn't the face of someone packing luggage. It was the face of someone letting go. Later that night, when I unzipped the suitcase to check everything, I froze. Tucked neatly on top of my folded sweaters was a small framed photograph, the last picture of our family together before the accident that took his father. Next to it, a letter sealed in an envelope with my name written in Daniel's handwriting. My fingers shook as I reached for it, afraid to read, afraid to know. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. For a moment I just stared at my name written in Daniel's handwriting, uneven, pressed too hard against the paper, as if each letter carried the weight of something unspeakable. I wanted to open it, but fear held me still. What could he possibly have to say that he couldn't tell me face to face? The walls of the old house seemed to close in around me, whispering the memories I was trying so hard to pack away. I finally tore the envelope open, my heart racing faster than it had in years. Inside, I found a single sheet of paper folded twice. The first words broke me instantly. "I'm sorry, Mom." Tears blurred my vision as I read his shaky handwriting. He wrote about how guilty he felt for convincing me to sell the house, how he couldn't bear seeing me live among ghosts anymore. But then his words took a turn, darker, more desperate. "There's something I need to tell you before you move," he wrote. "Something I've hidden for years." My breath caught in my throat. He confessed that the night of the accident wasn't exactly how I remembered it, that he had been there, behind the wheel, not his father, that he had begged his dad not to let me know, and his father took the blame, even in death. I dropped the letter, my body numb. My son, my sweet Daniel, was the one who had driven that car, the one who had kept me in the dark all these years while I grieved the wrong person. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, the weight of truth crushing me. The silence of the house was deafening now. No creaks, no ticking clocks, only the faint echo of my heartbeat and the soft rustle of the paper beside me. I wanted to scream, but the sound never came. Instead, I found myself whispering his name again and again, as if saying it could undo the past. My mind flashed with images. Daniel's tears at the funeral. The way he flinched every time I mentioned his father. The sleepless nights I thought were grief, but were really guilt. I realized then that his help with the move wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of confession. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter again, reading the same lines over and over until the words lost their meaning. The paper was damp with tears that hadn't stopped all night. The house, once filled with Daniel's laughter, now echoed with my disbelief. I wanted to hate him, God knows I tried, but every memory of his childhood kept flooding back. His first steps, his crooked smile, the way he used to hold my hand crossing the street. How could I reconcile that little boy with the man who had just shattered my heart? The truth was unbearable, but even through the pain, I could feel the silent scream of a mother's love fighting not to die. When Daniel arrived later that morning, pretending nothing was wrong, I couldn't look at him the same. He poured coffee, his hands slightly trembling, and said, "You didn't sleep, did you?" His eyes searched mine for forgiveness he hadn't earned yet. I held the letter between us. "When were you going to tell me, Daniel?" My voice cracked and his shoulders sank instantly. The color drained from his face. He didn't deny it, he just nodded, lips trembling, and said, "I thought I could carry it forever, Mom. I thought I could protect you." Those words pierced deeper than any knife. Protect me. By burying the truth that destroyed both of us? He began to cry, his body shaking as he confessed everything: the storm that night, the fight they had before leaving, the curve on the road, the flash of headlights. He told me how his father pulled him out of the car, bloodied and broken, whispering, "Don't let her know." Daniel had lived every day since then in a prison of guilt, building walls around himself so I'd never see the truth behind his eyes. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, ashamed, whispering, "You should hate me." But I didn't. I couldn't. My pain was deep, but deeper still was the love that had kept us alive all these years. For a long time, we sat in silence, two broken souls bound by a lie, meant to protect love but built on tragedy. And as I looked at him, the same eyes as his father, the same trembling hands, I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, but maybe it could come eventually. Because despite everything, he was still my son. That night, I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I tried, I saw the crash again. Not as I remembered it, but as Daniel described. The rain, the screeching tires, the sound of metal twisting into screams. I saw his father's face, calm even in the chaos, shielding our son one last time. I kept thinking about how much pain both of them carried in silence, one until death, the other for all the years that followed. I felt betrayed, but beneath the betrayal lived something even stronger, the unbearable sadness of knowing. Daniel had lived in torment just to protect me. I walked through the house one last time, each room glowing faintly under the pale light of dawn, and realized this wasn't a home anymore. It was a museum of ghosts, built on love and lies. When Daniel woke up, his eyes were swollen from crying. He asked if I'd slept, and I lied, saying I had. I didn't want to make him feel worse. We packed the last of the boxes in silence. I could see the exhaustion in his movements, the kind that comes not from work, but from years of carrying a secret too heavy for one soul. I wanted to say something that would heal us both, but no words felt right. Finally, as we loaded the final box into the truck, I whispered, "You've punished yourself enough, Daniel." He stopped, eyes wide. "I don't know how to stop, Mom," he said. And that's when I knew he wasn't just seeking forgiveness. He was seeking peace. We drove toward the new apartment, the road stretching endlessly before us. The same kind of road that had once taken everything from us. Every turn made me hold my breath. The silence between us was fragile, filled with the weight of things that could never be undone. Then Daniel reached out and placed his hand over mine. "I wish I could take it back," he murmured. I turned to him and said softly, "You can't change the past, but you can stop letting it destroy you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, small but real. When we finally arrived, I looked at the empty apartment and felt a strange calm. Maybe starting over wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about learning to live with what remained. The first days in the new apartment felt unreal, like living inside a hollow version of my own life. The walls were bare, the air smelled of paint, and silence echoed where memories should have been. Daniel tried to keep busy, assembling furniture, organizing boxes, pretending that work could drown out guilt, but I could see it eating at him. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the window, eyes lost somewhere far away, like he was still on that rainy road years ago. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words stayed trapped behind my lips. Forgiveness isn't a sentence, it's a slow process, like learning to breathe again after nearly drowning. One night I found him sitting alone in the dark, the letter I had already read resting in his hands. "Why did you keep this?" I asked quietly. He didn't look up, because I thought maybe one day I'd be brave enough to give it to you. My heart cracked open all over again. I sat beside him, and for the first time, I told him the truth he needed to hear. Your father's last act wasn't to protect you from punishment. It was to protect you from losing yourself. Don't waste that sacrifice living in chains. His eyes filled with tears, and he whispered, "But how do I forgive myself, Mom?" I didn't know the answer. I only knew that sometimes love has to hold the space where forgiveness will grow. The next morning, Daniel left early. He said he needed to get some air, but something in his voice made me uneasy. Hours passed, and the sky began to darken. The sound of rain against the window brought back every memory I wanted to forget. When he finally returned, he was soaked, holding a small wooden box. "I went to Dad's grave," he said, his voice trembling. I told him the truth. He opened the box and showed me the old car keys, rusted, worn, the same ones from that night. "I left them there," he whispered, I think it's time to let him rest." I didn't speak. I just pulled him close, and for the first time in years, I felt the heaviness begin to lift, like the air itself had chosen to forgive. The following week, the rain didn't stop. It was as if the sky itself was trying to wash away everything we had buried for so long. I watched Daniel from the kitchen window, standing on the balcony with his eyes closed, letting the rain fall over him like a baptism. There was something peaceful in his stillness, something I hadn't seen in him for years. Maybe confessing to his father, even after death, had freed a part of him. But guilt is stubborn. It lingers in quiet moments when the house is too silent and the heart too loud. I knew that look on his face, the one that says, "I'm better," but really means I'm barely holding on. I had worn that same mask myself once. At night, I'd hear him pacing the living room. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the apartment like restless ghosts. Sometimes he would whisper, apologizing to a memory that couldn't answer. One night, I stepped out and found him holding the framed photo of the three of us. His fingers brushed over his father's face, and he whispered, "I wish I could trade places with him." I froze. The pain in his voice was deeper than I'd imagined. I walked to him, gently taking the photo away. "You're still here for a reason, Daniel," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe that reason is to make peace with what happened." He looked at me with eyes full of disbelief, as if peace was a luxury he no longer deserved. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, I began to notice small changes. He started leaving the apartment more often, sometimes just for walks. Sometimes to visit the local community center where he volunteered to help kids with driving lessons. The irony wasn't lost on me, but maybe that was the point. Healing, I realized, often hides in irony. He was trying to teach others control, the very thing he had lost that night. Each day he came home with tired eyes but a lighter spirit, and for the first time I saw hope flicker again. One evening, he smiled faintly and said, "Maybe Dad would have liked what I'm doing." I smiled back. "He would have been proud of you, Daniel. I already am." The morning after I found that letter, I couldn't stop watching Daniel. Every movement, every pause, every glance felt like a window into his pain, one I had never truly seen before. I thought I had known what grief looked like, but this This was something deeper, the kind of hurt that hides behind forced smiles and polite "I'm fines." I realized then that my son had been screaming in silence for years, while I mistook his quiet for strength. That thought broke me in ways I didn't think I could still break. I made breakfast, pretending not to have read it, but when I placed his coffee on the table, he looked up with tired eyes and whispered, "You found it, didn't you?" I nodded. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at his hands, trembling slightly. "I wrote it the night before my birthday," he finally said. "I was drunk, lost, and I couldn't bear the thought of seeing you smile at me again without knowing what I'd done." My throat closed. I wanted to scream that he should have told me, that I would have carried it with him, that he never had to face it alone. But all I could manage was, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shook his head. "Because every time I looked at you, I saw him. And I didn't think I deserved to be seen." Those words sliced through me. My heart ached not only for the secret he carried, but for the years he spent believing he wasn't worthy of love. That night, I sat in his room after he fell asleep, watching his chest rise and fall. For the first time in a long time, he looked peaceful. I thought about all the nights he must have stared at the ceiling, wishing for an end, and I silently thanked whatever force had kept him alive. I walked to the window and whispered into the darkness, "You did the right thing, love. He's still here." Maybe his father could hear me. I liked to believe he could. The next morning, I decided something. I wasn't just going to forgive Daniel. I was going to help him forgive himself. Because if love could survive everything we'd been through, it deserved the chance to rebuild. Days turned into a strange rhythm, quiet mornings, soft conversations, and a shared effort to act normal when neither of us truly felt it. Daniel started talking more, opening small pieces of his heart at a time, as if testing whether I'd still love him after each confession. And I always did. I loved him through the tremors in his voice, through the tears that came without warning, through the silence that followed his pain. But one night, while I was washing the dishes, he said something that made my blood run cold. "Mom," he began softly, "do you ever wish I had been the one who died instead of Dad?" I froze. The sound of running water suddenly felt deafening. I turned to him, and he was staring at me, desperate, broken, and fragile. "No," I said immediately, but my voice cracked. I dried my hands and walked over to him, forcing his face to meet mine. "Don't ever say that again, Daniel. Not even as a thought." His eyes filled with tears. "But it's true, isn't it? He was the good one. He was the strong one. I'm just what's left." My heart shattered hearing that. I cupped his face with both hands. "No. You're what he left me to protect. You are his proof that love doesn't end with tragedy." He tried to argue, but I wouldn't let him. "You didn't take him from me, Daniel." "Fate did. But if you let guilt keep you chained to that night, then I lose you too, and I can't survive that twice." He broke down, sobbing into my shoulder. I held him tight, like I did when he was little, whispering words of forgiveness into his hair until his breathing slowed. For the first time, he let me hold some of his pain, and in that moment, I realized healing wasn't about forgetting the accident, it was about surviving it together. Later that night, I found him asleep on the couch, the photo of our family resting on his chest. I covered him with a blanket and smiled through tears. Maybe the worst part of grief isn't losing someone, it's forgetting how to keep living for those who remain. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the window for the first time in weeks, bathing the apartment in a soft golden glow. It felt different, warmer, almost forgiving. Daniel was sitting on the balcony, quietly drinking coffee. There was something in his expression that I hadn't seen in years. Peace. It wasn't complete, but it was real. He looked at me and smiled faintly. "I slept," he said, as if the word itself was a miracle. And maybe it was. We talked for hours that day, not about guilt or loss, but about ordinary things, the kind of conversations we hadn't had since before the accident. I realized then how healing doesn't always arrive with tears. Sometimes it comes wrapped in laughter so soft you almost miss it. But as peace began to find its way in, I noticed something else. Daniel's health was fading. His face looked paler, and his hands trembled more often. When I asked if he was okay, he brushed it off. "Just tired, Mom. I've been pushing too hard, yet deep down I knew something wasn't right." The body always remembers what the soul tries to forget. Guilt had been his poison for too long, and now it seemed it was eating away at him. I convinced him to see a doctor. Days later, he came home quiet, holding a small white envelope. "They said I need more tests," he murmured, his voice distant. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spiraled with dread. The next morning, I found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at nothing. "What did they say?" I whispered. He looked up, his eyes filled with something between fear and resignation. "It's my heart, Mom. The stress. It's taken a toll." My knees went weak. I reached for him, but he smiled, a sad, gentle smile that reminded me of his father. "Don't cry," he said softly. Maybe this is how I finally let go of the past. I shook my head, refusing to accept it. "No, Daniel. You don't let go by dying. You let go by living." I held him close, my tears falling into his hair. That's when I realized love is both the reason we break and the reason we keep going. And no matter what came next, I wasn't going to lose him again. Not to fate, not to silence, not to silence. The next weeks blurred into endless hospital visits, sterile hallways, and the hum of machines that kept my son alive. Daniel tried to act strong, always joking with the nurses, pretending it was just stress, but I could see the truth behind his forced smiles. Every night, when the hospital lights dimmed and the world went quiet, I sat beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, terrified of the moment it might stop. The same fear that had haunted me since his father's death returned, only this time, it wasn't a memory. It was a countdown. He held my hand one night, his skin pale, his pulse faint but steady. "Mom," he whispered, "you don't have to stay every night." I smiled through tears. "I stayed when you were born. I'll stay while you live." His eyes glistened, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who once ran to me after scraping his knee, looking for comfort only a mother could give. Days passed, and his condition worsened. The doctor explained that his heart had weakened more than they expected, that guilt and stress had silently corroded him from the inside. "We'll do everything we can," they said, but their eyes betrayed their hope. I began praying like I hadn't prayed in years, not for miracles, but for mercy. One night, as the rain beat softly against the hospital window, Daniel looked at me and said, "If something happens to me, promise me you'll forgive me completely." My throat closed, tears spilling before I could even respond. "There's nothing left to forgive," I whispered. "You've always been my reason to live, Daniel. Don't ask me to imagine a world without you in it." He smiled faintly, his breathing shallow. "Then live for both of us, Mom. Live for the love that never died." Those words carved themselves into my soul. The monitor beside him beeped steadily, but the sound felt fragile, like one wrong breath could shatter it. I leaned close, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You're not going anywhere, my boy." He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes, peaceful and still, as if surrendering to a long-awaited rest. The room felt colder that night. The rain stopped. The silence was absolute. And for a moment, I didn't know if I had just witnessed an ending or the beginning of something eternal. The night Daniel slipped into that fragile sleep, I sat frozen beside him, afraid that moving, breathing, even whispering his name might steal the little life left in him. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor became my only prayer, each sound a plea to whatever mercy still existed in this world. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, machines hissed softly, and I clung to his hand, cold, but still there. When dawn broke, a soft light filled the room. I looked at his face, calm and pale, and for the first time in years, he looked free. Then, slowly, the beeping began to fade. My heart stopped with it. "Daniel?" I whispered. No answer. The nurse rushed in, then the doctor, and suddenly everything was chaos. Voices, alarms, movement, and then silence. And then silence that means the world has just changed forever. I remember screaming, though it didn't sound like me. It was something primal, raw, pulled from a place beyond grief. They tried to hold me, but I tore away, collapsing against his body, begging him to come back. "Please, baby, not you too." My tears soaked the hospital sheets, and for a moment it felt like the world had folded in on itself, as if I had been thrown back to the night of the accident. Forced to relive the same loss, the same emptiness, all over again. But this time, there was no lie to soften the blow, only truth. Brutal, merciless truth. When they finally took him away, I stayed in the room long after. The walls felt heavy with memories, his laughter, his guilt, his redemption. I noticed his belongings on the table. The photo of our family, worn at the edges, and a note folded beneath it. My shaking hands reached for it. The handwriting was weak, unsteady, but still his. It read, "Don't let my story end here, Mom. Live like you taught me, with love, not regret." I pressed the note to my chest, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. That morning, I walked out of the hospital without him, but with something he'd given me. A reason to keep going. I realized grief doesn't end when a heartbeat does. It changes shape, finds new places to live. And as I looked at the sky, I whispered, "I'll keep my promise, Daniel. I'll live for both of us." The days after Daniel's death passed like shadows, quiet, colorless, unreal. The apartment that once felt too small for our pain now felt too big for my loneliness. I wandered through the rooms, touching his things, half expecting to hear his voice calling out, "Mom, where's the coffee?" But the silence answered for him. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, the way he said, "Live for both of us." It haunted me at first, like an impossible command. How could I live when every breath felt borrowed from the one I lost? But one morning, as sunlight poured through the window he used to sit by, I realized something. Maybe that was exactly the point. He wanted me to keep his light alive in the spaces he once filled. I found his old volunteer badge from the community center, driving instructor, Daniel Moore. My chest ached seeing his name printed there, so full of purpose, so undeservedly short-lived. I decided to visit the center. The moment I stepped inside, I felt him everywhere. In the laughter of the kids, in the smell of engine oil and chalk dust, in the sound of a young boy proudly shouting, "I did it!" The director recognized me immediately. "You must be Daniel's mother," she said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. "He talked about you all the time," she continued. "Said you were his reason for changing." Her words broke me open. For the first time, I cried without guilt, not from regret, but from love. That evening, I returned home with an idea, one that felt like a whisper from Daniel himself. I began sorting through his things, organizing his notes, his lesson plans, his scribbled drawings of road safety diagrams. It became my mission to finish what he started. I decided to create a foundation in his name, a place for young drivers, especially those who carried fear, loss, or guilt of their own. A safe place to learn not just how to drive, but how to move forward. It wouldn't bring him back, but it would give meaning to the pain. As I wrote the first words for the Foundation's mission statement, my hands stopped trembling for the first time in months. In memory of Daniel Moore, I typed, whose greatest lesson was that even broken hearts can still move. The following months became a blur of motion, paperwork, meetings, fundraisers, endless planning. Yet, for the first time in years, every day had meaning. The Daniel Moore Foundation began to take shape, and each step felt like breathing life back into him piece by piece. I could almost hear his laugh when I made mistakes, his teasing voice saying, "Mom, you're overthinking it again." There were nights I sat alone at the desk, staring at his photo, whispering updates as if he were still here. "We got our first sponsor today," I'd say softly. "The kids start next week." And somehow, I always felt a presence in the room, not haunting, but guiding. When the opening day arrived, I stood before a crowd of young faces and grieving parents who, like me, had lost something they could never replace. My heart pounded as I began to speak. "This foundation," I said, voice trembling, "was born out of pain. But it exists because pain, when shared, can become healing." I looked at a boy in the front row, no older than Daniel was when the accident happened, and I smiled through tears. "My son taught me that redemption doesn't come from forgetting what broke us. It comes from choosing to live anyway." The room fell silent, and then, slowly, applause filled the air. It was gentle, respectful, yet powerful enough to make me cry all over again. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She said her brother had died in a car crash 2 years ago, and she hadn't driven since. "But hearing your story," she whispered, "I think I'm ready to try again." Her words were like a spark in the dark. In that instant, I understood. Daniel's story hadn't ended. It was still unfolding, carried by every life it touched. That night, as I locked up the building, I looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered like the broken pieces of a life that somehow still glittered. I whispered, "You did it, my love. You found a way to live forever." And as the wind brushed my hair, soft and warm, I could almost feel his hand there, steady, reassuring, proud. Weeks after the foundation opened, letters began arriving from people I'd never met. Some were handwritten, others typed, but all carried the same heartbeat: gratitude. One woman wrote, "Your story made me call my mother again after 5 years." Another said I was ready to give up, but "Your son's courage gave me strength." Each word felt like a thread sewing meaning into the holes grief had left inside me. I kept those letters in a box labeled for Daniel. Every night, I'd read one aloud, as if my voice could carry it somewhere beyond this world. And maybe, just maybe, it did. Because sometimes, when I finished reading, a warm breeze would pass through the window, soft and tender, like a whisper saying, "I hear you." The foundation grew faster than I expected. Local news shared our story, and people came from other cities just to volunteer. Every time someone said his name, I felt a mix of pride and ache. It's strange how hearing the name of the one you've lost can hurt and heal in the same breath. I began teaching classes myself, helping nervous teens who reminded me so much of Daniel. One day, a boy with trembling hands asked, "What if I fail?" I smiled and told him, "Failure is just proof that you tried. And trying means you're alive." He grinned, and for a brief moment, I saw my son in his eyes. Late one evening, I stayed behind after everyone left. The classroom was quiet, the scent of chalk and oil lingering in the air. I sat in Daniel's old chair, tracing my fingers over the initials he had once carved on the desk, DM, and whispered, "We did it, my boy." Then suddenly, the lights flickered. The room filled with a faint hum, and I could swear I smelled rain, the same scent from the night of the accident. But this time, it didn't bring sorrow. It brought peace. I closed my eyes and felt him there, not as the broken boy I lost, but as the calm, gentle soul he became. That night, I realized something profound. Death may end a life, but not a relationship. Ours continued, not through words, but through purpose, through love, through every heart he helped heal. It's been 3 years since Daniel's passing, yet not a single day feels empty anymore. The pain still lives within me, quiet, softer now, but alongside it grows something new: purpose. The foundation thrives. Dozens of young drivers have passed through our doors, each carrying their own story, each leaving a piece of their healing behind. On the wall of our classroom, framed beside Daniel's photograph, hangs the letter he once wrote, the one that began with, "I'm sorry. Mom, I've read it so many times the ink has begun to fade, but now I see it differently. It's no longer a confession of guilt, it's a testament of transformation." The boy who once thought he didn't deserve forgiveness ended up teaching the world what forgiveness truly means. Every year on his birthday, I visit the hill overlooking the city where we used to watch the sunset together. I bring his favorite flowers, white lilies, and talk to him about the kids, about how the foundation's growing, about how his story keeps saving lives. Sometimes, I sit there until night falls, letting the city lights blur like stars, imagining him smiling somewhere just beyond my reach. Grief, I've learned, doesn't disappear. It becomes a quiet companion, a reminder that love was real, that it still is. And though I'll never stop missing his laugh, his hugs, or the sound of his keys jingling when he came home, I've stopped asking why. Now I ask how. How can I keep loving him better, even in his absence? Before I leave the hill, I always whisper the same words. You were never my burden, Daniel. You were my purpose. Then I close my eyes and feel it, that familiar warmth brushing against my cheek, like a kiss carried by the wind. Maybe it's the breeze. Maybe it's him. I no longer need proof, because love like this doesn't end. It transforms, it guides, it rebuilds. And as long as I'm breathing, he's still here, in every student who learns to drive with courage, in every parent who finds strength in pain, and in every heartbeat that chooses to keep going, even when it hurts.